Hello children, how are you? Hope that you are all doing good. Do you remember what we were discussing in the last few classes? Yes, we were discussing about friction. Friction is the force which opposes motion. It tries to hold back the objects which are moving. We know that friction is caused by the irregularities of the two surfaces which are in contact. The irregularities are interlocked with each other and it tries to block the motion of the objects. So, when the irregularities are more, the friction is more. Also, we have seen that friction causes wear and tear. It causes the parts of the machines to be hot and some of the energy is wasted. So, in that case friction is not a desirable thing, it is undesirable, or we say that friction is an evil. So, if that is the case, can we think about a world without friction? If there is no friction, there is no wear and tear, there is no heating of the parts of the machines, there is no wastage of energy, will it be good? Is everything okay if there is no friction at all? No. See, if friction is not there, we cannot even walk, the machines cannot work, we cannot hold the things with our hand. The life will become so impossible then. It is with the help of friction that we are able to walk, that we are able to hold the things with our hand, that one part of the machine is able to move other part of the machine. So, in this sense friction is necessary, it is desirable. So, we say that friction is desirable in some situations, whereas friction is not desirable in some other situations. So, we say that friction is a necessary evil. So, there are situations in which we need friction, friction is helping us, and there are some other situations in which we do not want friction, friction is undesirable. So, it is a tricky situation. How to overcome this? So, what we do in situations where friction is necessary, friction is desirable, we try to maximize friction, and in situations where friction is not necessary, it is undesirable, we try to minimize it. Today in this session, what we are going to do, we are going to discuss about how do we maximize friction wherever it is desirable and how do we minimize friction wherever it is undesirable. How we are going to do this, we are going to discuss now. Let us take this example. Shiva and Ravi are playing carom board. Shiva is asking Ravi to pass the striker to him. They found that the striker does not move freely, it gets stopped in the midway suddenly. Seeing this, Ravi puts some white powder on the carom board and the striker moves freely. You might have done this while playing carom board. Why the striker moves freely when the white powder is sprinkled on the surface of the carom board? What actually happens when we are putting this white powder on the surface? The striker does not move freely when the friction between the striker and the board is more. We know that the irregularities of the surfaces causes friction. So, the irregularities between the bottom surface of the coin and the top surface of the carom board, if it is more, there will be more friction and it causes the coin not to move freely. As we sprinkle the carom powder fills the irregularities of the surface and it helps the coin to move freely then. So, we have seen one situation in which friction is not desirable, and how do we overcome this? I have some questions to you. After sprinkling the carom powder on the surface and if you start playing, after some time what happens and what we have to do then? That is my first question. Try to find answer for this. the next question is that, can we reduce the friction to 0? Is it possible? So, try to find answer to these questions. All of you might be familiar with tailoring machine, at least you might have seen at least one time. Sometimes it becomes difficult to work with the tailoring machine. It does not move freely when we are pedaling it. Then what do we do? You might have seen that people apply oil at some parts of the tailoring machine, and we have seen that after applying this oil, the machine works so smoothly. Did you see the rope and pulley arrangement for fetching water from the well? Villagers use this. Sometimes it becomes hard to rotate the pulley and the pulley makes some sound. What do we do then? Yes, you might have seen that villagers, they apply some oil to the pulley. After putting the oil to the pulley, the sound stops, pulley moves freely. So, in these situations, after applying oil to the tailoring machine, and in this case of pulley, it works smoothly. What actually happens when we are putting oil? What are we actually doing here? We know that it becomes difficult to move the objects when there is more friction. If we want to move the objects, we have to overcome the friction or we have to reduce the friction. So, here we apply oil to reduce the friction. So, the oil fills the irregularities and it becomes a layer, it forms a layer on the surface of the two surfaces which are moving. We know that it becomes difficult to move the objects when there is more friction. So, for the free movement we have to reduce the friction somehow. So, in these situations which we discussed just now, we are using oil. So, the oil fills the irregularities of the surfaces and it forms a layer in between, and thereby the friction is greatly reduced. So, we use some substances which forms a layer and reduces friction, and these substances are known as lubricants. So, this is another way of reducing friction by the use of lubricants. So, we discussed one lubricant, that is oil. There are different types of lubricants. So, I suggest you to find out the different names of the lubricants that are used in different places. Also, try to find out, is there any other type of lubricants other than liquids. So, we have discussed about the lubricant, and in this case oil acts as a lubricant. I suggest you to make a list of lubricants that are used in different places. Also, I suggest you to find out a lubricant's name which is not in the form of liquid. Okay? Let us take another case. It is quite often we may have to carry big suitcases and bags while traveling. Did you notice these bags? They have some wheels. It is so easy to carry the trolley suitcases compared with those without wheels. Why is it so? Yes, here also friction is the villain. When you slide a bag, friction opposes the motion of the bag. You have to apply extra force to overcome this friction and to move the bag. So, what are we doing by fixing the wheels to it? Okay, let us see this simple example. See, I have kept one book on the top of this table. If I want to move this book, I have to apply a force, and the applied force should be more than the friction. It should overcome the friction, and then only the book can move. So, I am applying a force. Look at this. As I apply a force, the book moves on the table. Now I keep few pens on the top of this table like this. So I kept few pens on the top of the table, and I take this book and I am keeping this book on the top of these pens like this. Now if I want to move this book, it is much easier. The book moves with even less force. Now I take two pens, and these two pens I arrange on the top of the table like this. I take this book and I keep the book on the table of. So now if I apply a force, the book moves freely. So it is easier in the second case compared with the first case. The same thing is applied in the case of trolley bags. Now can you tell what are we doing here? Yes, exactly, we are converting the sliding friction into rolling friction, and we know that rolling friction is less than the sliding friction. So the use of wheels and converting the sliding friction into rolling friction is applied in many situations. We say wheel is the greatest inventions of the mankind. Now you may be having a better idea about this sentence, right? Have you seen people moving heavy objects by keeping the heavy object on the top of some pipes? So there are several situations in which the sliding friction is converted into rolling friction. Some of the situations we discussed here. I suggest you to observe around you and make a list of situations in which the sliding friction is converted into rolling friction, and thereby we do the things easily. Okay? Have you ever visited a cycle repair shop? Have you seen some small spherical objects kept between the parts of a machine, and these spherical objects help in movement of these parts? What are these spherical objects? These are known as ball bearings. So the ball bearings help in rotation of the objects. These are known as ball bearings, and these ball bearings convert the sliding friction into rolling friction and reduce the friction. So we have seen one more situation in which friction is not desirable, and how do we overcome this? Now let us discuss some cases where friction is desirable and how do we maximize friction. Let us take an example. We are all familiar that walking on a smooth wet floor is difficult. If you do not take care, we may even fall down. You might have seen the caution boards kept when the floor is wet after cleaning. We are unable to walk freely, or even we may fall down because of the lack of sufficient friction. If you look at the sole of your shoe or sandal, you can see that it is grooved. These grooves are made for increasing the friction so that we can walk safely. If you look at the running spikes used by athletes, you can see sharp spikes at the sole. These spikes are fitted there to give sufficient friction while running. Children, have you seen the running spikes used by the athletes? Did you notice the sole of the running spikes? Here there is a running spike. If you look at the sole, you can see sharp spikes fitted to the sole. See, these sharp spikes help for getting better friction. So, while running it gives a better grip. Did you see such grooves somewhere else? Yes, the tires are threaded to increase the friction. What happens after the prolonged use of these tires? What do we do then? Try to find out, okay? Have you ever played kabaddi? Oh, it's an interesting and thrilling game, right? When a rider from the opposite team comes to our side, we rub our hands with soil. Why do we do this? Rubbing hands with soil increases the friction and we can catch the rider easily. Otherwise, the rider may slip out of the hands. Did you see gymnasts performing? They apply some coarse substance on their hands to increase friction for better grip. What happens to the bicycle's brake part after long use? Its surface becomes more even and less friction will be there between the brake part and the cycle tire. Then it becomes difficult to stop the bicycle. What do we do then? We change the brake pad with a new one. Did you see the surface of a new brake pad? There will be grooves made for providing a better friction. So, we have seen that there are many situations in which friction is desirable and we increase friction. So, we have discussed in today's session the situations in which friction is desirable and how do we maximize friction, how do we increase friction. And we have discussed situations in which friction is not desirable, undesirable, and how do we reduce the friction. I suggest you to observe your surroundings carefully and add examples to the list of situations in which friction is desirable and the situations in which friction is not desirable. Also try to find out in these situations how do we increase or decrease friction. So, I stop here. Thank you all.